Doogie.
Sam.
We're back after a 1 week absence and it is good to be here. Let's talk Simone Inzaghi, perhaps the most underrated manager in world football right now.
Since the spring of 2023, Inzaghi has managed to turn his Inter side into an all-conquering machine. And this isn't the eye-rolling, yawn-inducing 3-5-2 of the past. Inter are fun to watch, even exhilarating at times.
Inter are champions! Inter win the derby! Inter win the Scudetto! Number 20 is no longer a dream, it's a reality now!
They and Simone Inzaghi have made Serie A look very easy. They played with a real aura about them. I think Inzaghi has shown himself to be the best of them all, really.
Yes, hello everyone and welcome to The Truth. I am your host, Sam Tighe. Joining me is Doogie Critchley from afar. Hello, Doogie.
Hi, Sam. Yeah, unfortunately from afar this week, although the benefit of recording remotely is that I have some cheddar cheese to hand for when things get too heavy in this podcast. I'm looking forward to recording this. I think I suggested this topic. I'm fairly passionate about it, so I'm looking forward to it. How are you doing?
So you're just going to sit here during this pod and gnaw on some cheese all the way through?
I might have a little bit of cheese, just to perk me up after about 15, 20 minutes, if I feel like I deserved it.
Okay, I'd say a bunch of cheese on a pizza.
Oh,
of course, it's one of the core ingredients of pizza. I'd like to just let's introduce Jack first, and then I'll apologise profusely to the listenership. Jack, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, Sam. How you doing? You feeling better?
Yes, I'm feeling better. Thank you for leading me on to that. Sorry, everyone, for not producing an episode of The Truth last week. I had the week from hell. I got a pretty nasty strain of gastroenteritis, which took me basically 5-6 days to get over. I won't go into the nasty details, but I did starve myself for 30 hours at one point to kill the bug that had latched onto me, and it was very unpleasant. I also lost a lot of money because I'm a freelancer and I was ill on deadline day, so that sucked. However, there is a silver lining. I didn't really leave my bed for 3 days, so I had a lot of time to watch films, and I watched all of the modern King Kong and Godzilla films in chronological order. I have to say, I don't think we talk about them enough. It's great stuff, the Monsterverse.
That's a great shift.
Yeah, I've joined a subreddit for King Kong. I'm really into it now. It's my new thing. Going to make it my personality. So some good has come of it.
As the Detroit Lions became irrelevant, you've just found King Kong.
Well, the NFL's on break now for 8 months, actually. They take a long time off. So
how long do they take off?
February through to September, basically. It's a long time. So yeah, I've got to do something else with my free time. So King Kong it is. Right. I think, Jack, Doogie, we're going to really enjoy our subject this week. It's always a positive when one of us, Doogie this time, is super passionate about it. We're going to talk about Inter manager Simone Inzaghi. Doogie, it is your idea. So as usual, when that happens, I will throw it to you and ask, why are we talking about him?
Well, I think because when people talk about the best managers in the world, they always go to the same names. They go to Pep, obviously. They go to Klopp when he was managing at Liverpool. They go to Ancelotti and maybe they throw a Simeone in there, but they rarely talk about Simone Inzaghi. So it does feel like he's a very, very underrated manager. I think he's got a really fascinating backstory. I think he's done underrated work at 2 clubs now. And it does feel like he's got a really, really exciting future in the game as well. I'm slightly surprised he's not been more strongly linked with other top clubs, but maybe that's out of respect for Inter and the team that he's created there and the way they've recovered from a really difficult few years financially. Let's say there has been a lot of success on the pitch, but it's been a little bit dicey. He's had a lot to contend with, so I think he's definitely a topic and a manager worth exploring in greater depth.
Yeah, I think my immediate takeaway for a very long time with Simone Inzaghi is that he was always the other Inzaghi, and he was kind of dwarfed by his much more famous as a footballer brother, Filippo Inzaghi. And the contrast between the two in terms of career and achievements is pretty stark, to be fair. I mean, Simone Inzaghi played for Lazio. He was a good player. He won a title with Lazio. But Pippo played for one of the great AC Milan teams, and he won 2 Champions Leagues. And Simone played 3 times for his country, Italy, And Pippo played 57 times. He scored 25 goals and he won the World Cup. And I have these really vivid memories of Pippo as a player, helped to a point by the fact that he was the butt of a few jokes where, you know, there's a bit of a joke in football. Pippo Inzaghi was born offside and things like that. Of course, that adds a charismatic element to his history and his memory. I have quite literally zero memories of Simone Inzaghi as a footballer. You know what? If I didn't know it for a fact because I've checked it out, I would honestly have assumed that he didn't even play. He just became a coach at 26. Like, that's how irrelevant his playing career was to someone like me, who is a 34-year-old Englishman who just didn't know about him. So the fact that he's been able to step out of his brother's shadow here as a manager, and is quite clearly a lot better than his brother at management, is really, really cool. And he's kind of finally having his moment. But as you say, Doogie, that moment probably isn't big and bright enough for what he's achieved.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's just, you're totally right to point out the contrast in brothers' playing careers. Just to slightly expand on that as well, you know, he started with his hometown of Piacenza and he was loaned out 4 times to clubs in Serie C. He eventually gets to Serie A with Piacenza. He gets 15 goals in 30 games, gets a move to Lazio. He scores 19 goals in his first season, but he only scores double figures once again in 9 seasons there. He gets loaned out twice more. And get this, Sam, in his final 60 games in Serie A, how many goals do you think he scored?
Well, it seems like it's going to be not very many. I'm going to guess 5.
2.
Oh.
2 in your final 60. Absolute madness. And then he retires at Lazio and he joins Lazio's Primavera side. So that's the equivalent of their sort of under 21s over here. And he takes over from Pioli on an interim basis in April 2016. At the start of the 2016-17 season, which is almost a kind of sliding doors moment, let's say, in his managerial career, maybe he would have got to the stage he has done without this, but it is a fascinating moment. He's replaced by Marcelo Bielsa, but Bielsa leaves after a week and Inzaghi takes back his job.
I remember this. This is the whole, obviously the story was all about Bielsa just being Bielsa. But will somebody think of Simone Inzaghi at this point? You know, like overshadowed his whole playing career by his brother. And then in this situation, it is brought in and out, you know, depending on what somebody else thinks on the back of a week in the job.
It's madness. And I think it does kind of speak to his character that he's a kind of roll up your sleeves. It's not really about me. I'm just going to get the job done sort of manager. So he eventually finishes 5th that year, reaches the Coppa Italia final. I think Lazio probably go, we might have a special manager on our hands. The following year, he finishes 5th. He wins the Super Cup, which in Italy and Spain, the Super Cup is a far bigger deal than it is in England. The equivalent is the Community Shield. In 2018-19, they take a dip in the league. They finish 8th, but he wins the Coppa Italia. That's the club's 4th win this century. They've actually got a reasonable record in the equivalent of the FA Cup over here. But 2019-20 was a huge moment. So they end up finishing 4th, but that doesn't really tell the whole story. So they lost 2 of their first 5 league games of that season, but they then go on a 21 league game unbeaten run up until COVID. So the league shuts down at the end of February. I know in the UK, it was more like March where the country shut down, but Italy obviously had it slightly earlier. And at that stage, Lazio are 1 point off the top, but they only win 5 of their final 12 games post-COVID and finish 4th with 78 points. That's 6 more than when they won the league in the year 2000. Ciro Immobile that year, who, again, similar to Pippo Inzaghi, well, not similar to in that respect, but has maybe faced some criticism at various points for his maybe
mostly
natural
from me.
abilities. Yeah, mainly from Sam Tighe.
I was going to say, Doogie, the one thing you never do on this podcast with Sam Tighe is mention Ciro Immobile. Like all of your points just got. Yeah, I saw his eyes just glaze. He was like, whatever you're talking about, his eyes have gone immediately at that point.
He was heading to the cheese drawer. He was nearly out of there full time, I think. But it's worth noting that Sam doesn't rate this player whatsoever. He scored 39 goals in 44 games that year. Absolutely insane. The following year, they finished 6th. And so during his time at Lazio, he never finishes lower than 8th. In that period, they lost some key players. They lost Felipe Anderson before he became the Felipe Anderson of more recent years. They lost De Vrij. They lost Pedro Neto, who was obviously a talented youngster. They lost Keita Balde, who had a reasonable goal-scoring record at Lazio. And on the 27th of May, 2021, Sam, he joins Inter Milan, replacing Antonio Conte, who had won the league in 2021. But it's fair to say that Conte's success at Inter had been bankrolled by huge spending.
It had. Sorry, before we go to Conte, I want to settle into our little niche that we've kind of slipped into here, which is dudes sitting around naming old footballers and having the best time. Because the Lazio team, when you actually look back at it, regardless of my feelings on Ciro Immobile, the players that he had at his disposal pretty consistently through those years and the players that he used, they are a bit of a throwback. Like the back three, Acerbi, who's obviously reunited with him at Inter, Luis Felipe and Stefan Radu, often the back three. The wing backs, Marasic and Lazzari and Lulic. Lucas Leiva at the base of midfield with Luis Alberto playing his best ever football probably in that system, and Sergei Milinkovic-Savic, who feels like a long forgotten memory.
What a player, though.
Well, I didn't actually like him that much either, but he was
Really?
he was yeah, he was a bit of a lump. But he was very effective, very effective. And there's a couple of hallmarks here from this Lazio team that I think Inzaghi has sort of taken forward in his career into his Inter team. And you look back and you start to look at the pieces he put in place, the types of players that he preferred, and his methods and his rotations. I think you start to see actually that his approach has been really consistent over the last 8-9 years, and it starts all the way back at Lazio. This is a big team. A lot of the players that I've just mentioned, it's a really big team. Like Milinkovic-Savic was constantly running into the box and scoring headers from central midfield. They would also be pretty prolific in skipping the ball up to him rather than building out from the back exclusively. They just use his big frame and get the ball down to him. The centre-backs were always big. The wing-backs were always really energetic. And there was always 4 of them, and he rotated them and he subbed them, which is something he does at Inter as well. So there's a couple of like really obvious key tenets that he has relied upon since all the way back from his Lazio days. And I think he likes physicality, and I think he likes height, and I think he appreciates those qualities even in a top team. And I know that he loves wing play, good, solid wing play. He loves energy up and down the flanks. And he knows that they're really important players in his system, and he has to keep them fresh. And he's never been afraid to make substitutions on the 60, 65-minute mark when it comes to his wing-backs, making sure that he has got a really fast, really energetic guy on each flank at all times. It sounds simple, but like there aren't actually that very many managers who are able to stick to their philosophy to this degree and also be successful. Like they bottle it, or they change their minds, or they go off in a different direction quite often. Inzaghi it's almost like he's been the same guy this whole way through. And that treated him really well at Lazio, where he was pretty consistent in terms of getting the team into good positions or positions to win trophies. And then what happened at Inter was that he stepped into a team that was just better, I guess. And the success has been even stronger.
Yeah, it's been pretty seamless. I do think it's worth sort of digging into the vaguely touching. I know some people glaze over a bit like you with Immobile when people mention finances, but they had spent so much money. Conte spent 320 million euros in 2 seasons there. He brought in Lukaku, Eriksen, Lazzaro, Politano, Hakimi, Barella, Sensi, Pinamonti. Some of these massive successes under him. You know, Lukaku, Hakimi, of course, Barella, but some players real misses. And since Inzaghi's been there, they've had to make a net profit of 114 million euros in 3.5 seasons. So they've sold Lukaku, Hakimi, Onana, Brozovic. In that time, in his 3 completed seasons, he's finished 2nd, 3rd and 1st. His 94 points last season was 19 ahead of 2nd place. They absolutely obliterated the competition. And that was only topped by 2006-07 in their entire history, which was obviously a period where Juventus weren't in Serie A due to the Calciopoli scandal. So he's won a trophy in every season. He's reached the Champions League final, which, by the way, Conte never made it out of the group stages with Inter Milan, which was a real stain on his record there. And this season, they're in a real title race, which we'll come on to in due course, but they've got the 5th best goal difference in Europe behind Bayern, Barcelona, PSG and Liverpool, but there's only 1 behind Liverpool. And Serie A is seriously competitive, as it has been for the last 4 or 5 years, really since the downfall of Juventus. So to be that impressive, both in attack and defence, I really do think is super noteworthy. And he's now got the best win percentage of any Inter Milan manager to take charge of more than 23 games. He's won 66% of matches. That's 3% more than Mourinho, who was and still is absolutely heralded as an absolute hero out there. Conte was the same on 63%. And his style, involving sort of every player in every phase of play, is a little bit of a throwback in many ways to the sort of total football sides of the 1970s. And one thing that you can really say about Simone Inzaghi is maybe he should have done slightly better in the leagues, at Inter at least. But he is an excellent cup manager. 3 Coppa Italias to his name, 5 Super Cups. And he's also had a real hold, up until recently at least, over Milan. He won 6 straight games against Milan, although they have lost 2 of the last 3 and they drew their most recent meeting as well. So I think his work at Inter, particularly last year where they won 29 league games, that was the joint most in Europe with Real Madrid. Only City, Bayern and Arsenal scored more goals. They had the best defence in Europe. And they just lost Onana, Brozovic, Dzeko and Skriniar that summer. I don't think there's too many managers that can lose so many key players so regularly, and yet the style doesn't change too much, and crucially, the results don't take a big dip. It does just feel like they are super competitive in every competition now, whereas Conte could excel in the league, but was nowhere near it in the Champions League. Inzaghi's created a beast that, Sam, it feels like can challenge and win every competition they're in.
Actually, it was quite surprising looking up Champions League wins by manager for Inter, and Inzaghi is now on like more than 20. He's won more than 20 games in the Champions League for Inter. Mourinho only ever won 10.
Wow.
I appreciate Mourinho wasn't there for a very long time, and he won the treble and he went, and it was legendary for many reasons, and the fact that it was quite short was part of that. But Conte has won like 5 games in the Champions League for Inter in his entire history at the club as a manager. And Mourinho won 10, and Inzaghi, I believe, is on 21. I did the rough maths earlier and then forgot the answer, but it's more than 20 for sure, which is incredible. They go back to that 2021 summer when he took over, and they sold Hakimi and Lukaku for 180 million euros combined. Imagine finally getting that big job at Inter. Not that Lazio is not a big job, because it is, but Inter is a different beast. And you go, hey, would you like the job? Yeah, brilliant, cool. Welcome to the top table. We have to sell Hakimi and Lukaku for financial reasons. What? Like the best target man in Italy and possibly the best wing back in football?
It's brutal.
Do you not think that I would quite like to use those guys? Like, I love wing backs. Can I keep Hakimi? No. And also the other thing is we've only got 12 million euros to sign his replacement. So is Denzel Dumfries okay? And Dumfries has been amazing, absolutely amazing. He's done wonders with him. But actually, most of the time when they make a big sale, they replace them with free transfers.
For sure.
It's like their sporting director, Beppe Marotta, says you can have anybody you want as long as they don't cost anything in transfer fees. And I don't want to paint this picture of Inter being like some pauper club, because they're absolutely not. They've definitely had cash flow issues and they've definitely had to make money, but they pay big wages. This is a big club with a huge stadium and a huge fan base, and they're not running on a shoestring budget. But all the players they sign, Çalhanoğlu was a free, Mkhitaryan was a free, Onana when he came in was a free, Thuram was a free, Sommer was like £6 million, Acerbi was half that, Renato Augusto was half that, Zielinski was free, Taremi is free. In January they went into the market, they got Zalewski on loan. And he's been really good to start off with. He was really impactful against Milan a couple of weeks ago, and he was pretty positive against Fiorentina on Monday night too from wingback. He does do some pretty decent work with limited options, even in the context of Inter. You have to hand it to the guy. And you look through the team, you look at what he's constructed over the last 3-4 years. The back three is De Vrij, Bastoni, Skriniar, and Skriniar changes into Acerbi. Like good players, big guys. You can see the hallmarks. DeMarco and Dumfries as wingbacks, super energetic, but uses Darmian, uses D'Ambrosio, like pretty normal looking players, but gets them into the system, gets them going. The fact that he was able to completely remodel Çalhanoğlu from a free kick taking number 10 to one of the best sixes in world football is still one of the most ridiculous things that I have ever seen in football. Like, I couldn't think of a player that I would want to convert into a 6 less than Çalhanoğlu, and yet it's happened. And they did it as a response to losing Brozovic, and you know what? They've got even better. I almost don't understand how he's done it. And I was looking up some quotes about him, trying to find like opinions of it, because I realized I don't really know much about Inzaghi as a person, like man management, how he deals with situations, because doesn't speak English. You don't get that coverage. You don't really hear his press conferences. Came across James Horncastle's analysis of him in the build-up to the Champions League final that they lost to City. He talked about him being a good manager, but someone who manages moments in games. And that's really important. It's also really hard. Like, what that means is subs, really. And he nails his subs. He's so good at substitutions, so good at changing the flow of a game, and so good at sustaining pressure with subs and adding fresh legs. Again, I go back to that derby they played against Milan a couple of weeks ago where they hit the post 3 times and it looked like they were going to lose 1-0, but they kept wave after wave after wave of attack going. And then eventually the ball goes in the back of the net just by sheer force of will. And that's Inter. That's Inzaghi's Inter. Like, they have been an absolute force from an attacking perspective this whole 3-year period. So scary to play against. No one in Italy can really deal with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Lautaro Martinez scoring 27 goals, getting 7 assists last year in 44 games. Like, he's always been an incredibly talented player, but this was new levels. Marcus Thuram picked up the mantle this season, at least in the first half when Lautaro was a bit out of form as well. DiMarco now turning into probably the best left wing back on the planet, along with probably Alex Grimaldo. These are real success stories, and you pointed out so many good ones already. I think character-wise, and this almost sounds a bit stupid, but I think he suffers, and the reason why I think he is underrated is because he doesn't PR himself. He never makes it about him. He is so willing to credit his players and credit the organisation and not really seek out the limelight. Like, someone with his list of achievements, for me, should be spoken about in that bracket below those real top elite managers that have been doing it for 10, 15 years. I don't see any reason in terms of his CV why he can't be considered on a par with someone like Diego Simeone in the last 5 years at least. Maybe Simeone deserves more respect because he's been there longer and he's also got more financial issues to deal with against Barcelona and Real Madrid than he does necessarily. So I think he deserves huge credit. And from everything you hear, maybe he slightly suffers from, this almost sounds a bit brutal, but maybe being a bit of an oddball at times in the media. Like, I think he's a quite quirky character, but whatever it is about that character, it just seems to work with an array of players, and he seems to be able to get people to really buy into their role within a team, similar to what we were talking about with Simeone, like Dzeko being such an excellent bench player for him. Arnautovic has now popped up with crucial goals, not least at the weekend against Fiorentina, after they'd lost to them 3-0 in their game in hand. Like, that was a big moment, and Arnautovic stepped up.
I'm intrigued. I'm going to step in here because you are talking about Diego Simeone, and it takes me really nicely onto my favourite agenda in football, which is that maybe the least heralded, but perhaps the most important modern managerial school is Sven-Göran Eriksson's Lazio team of the late 1990s and early 2000s. You look at the players that played under Sven-Göran Eriksson, a wonderful Lazio team, by the way, that won the title, had some very, very impressive victories. And you look at the managers that have come out of it. Simone Inzaghi, Roberto Mancini, Sergej Conceição, Diego Simeone, and the late, great Sinisa Mihajlovic, right? And I was talking about this recently because Monza have just reappointed Alessandro Nesta, who was also part of that team and has had a far less salubrious, shall we say, managerial career so far. There's also Hernan Crespo, who hasn't been successful everywhere he's gone in terms of his managerial career, shall we say, but also did lead Defensa Justicia in Argentina to their first ever international trophy. They won the Copa Sudamerica in 2021. He had some interesting times at Sao Paulo where he won the first title, the first honor for Sao Paulo in 9 years, I think. He then took 2 sides in Asia, first Al Duhail in Qatar to the semifinals of the AFC Champions League, and then Al Ain in Saudi Arabia to the final of the Asian Champions League and won that competition. So I'm not saying that all of these managers are going to go on to be the best in class, but actually the amount of exceptionally good managers, and I think we'd probably put Inzaghi, Mancini, Conceição and Simeone and Mihajlovic into that category at this point, is ludicrous. Like, having 5 managers who you would put in the kind of top drawer, for various reasons and obviously at various levels from the last decade of management is an outrageous managerial school. I don't think Sven-Göran Eriksson gets enough credit, especially in England, because he was seen as this slightly jokey figure when he was in charge of the English national team. But what he's put together here in terms of teaching these players, and look, I thought it was interesting that you spoke about Simeone and Inzaghi in the same breath in terms of getting the most out of certain players, in terms of not being afraid to play in a slightly different style or go against the grain and actually stick to their own principles, rings true with pretty much all of these managers.
Talking about going against the grain with style, looking into this subject and looking and scouting around and Google translating a bunch of Italian articles from about 10 years ago, I was quite surprised actually to see quite so much, how do I put this? A lot of people in Italy 10 years ago, actually no, let's call it 6 years ago. Let's call it around 2019, 20. It's just before Inzaghi is taking the Inter job, but he's done a very good job with Lazio. He sort of popularizes the back three in Italy once again. And there's a bunch of articles talking about how we've returned to the three pillars. There was even one article that translated it as return to the three power plants, which I thought was a fantastic way of talking about three centre-backs. And saying that obviously it's not like it's a brand new formation in Italy, not a chance. A bit of quick reading suggests that Nevio Scala, who managed Parma in the 90s, is the godfather of the 3-5-2 apparently in Italy, and that's not really true. Probably not true. I mean, this formation is like 100 years old, but everybody attributes it to Nevio Scala. And then following that, everyone goes, well, Conte and Inzaghi brought it back. So it's fair to say that in Italy, at least, he probably gets his flowers a little more. But Diggy, you're not really talking about that. You know, on a global scale here, if you ask anybody who the top five managers are, he'd be absolutely, it would be an afterthought. It wouldn't even pop into someone's brain. But at least it was pleasing to see that in Italy, he was getting his flowers. That said, I went back and actually I was on Reddit and I looked at the Inter subreddits, like the fans' reaction to his appointment back in 2021. I gotta say, it was very mixed.
Really?
Very, very. Yes, even coming off Lazio and the highs and the Supercoppa wins and punching above the weight, getting Ciro Immobile, who's basically can't run properly, to score 4 million goals or whatever you said it was. You'd think that would carry some favour. Maybe it's just because it was off the back of Conte. Well, he's not going to be as good, is he? Anyway, a couple of years on, there's another Reddit post with a load of people apologising. Literally a load of people saying, I was hashtag Inzaghi out. How wrong was I? So very steadily, everywhere he goes, Doogie, he has to win people over. And I guess the next step would be, to go outside of Italy. And that's the thing, isn't it? His whole career has taken place in Italy, playing and managing.
100%. And this season feels like his biggest test as well, because when he was, emerging at Lazio, Antonio Conte was already kind of at Chelsea, really. And then when he was in his final days of Lazio, Antonio Conte had, whatever I said at the start, 300 million euros in his side and, dealing with Inter Milan. Like, they're not direct competitors. And Conte is feted as, the serial winner of his generation of Italian coaches, if not necessarily the most entertaining of Italian coaches. I think most people would probably give that to Spalletti. Conte is really revered around Serie A as the guy, really. I mean, even when he was appointed last year, I was thinking, can Napoli go from 10th to a title? I don't think I even had them in my top four at the start of the season. Massively, massively underestimated what Conte could do there with no European football in particular. But this year is going to be a real test for sure. In terms of what the future holds, now we run the risk of it really angering Inter Milan fans. And I don't mean to do that whatsoever, but it is worth speculating or thinking about what could happen. So last summer, he signed an extension until 2026. He's already secured the club's much coveted second star. So 20 league titles. In Italy, you get a star for every 10 league titles. That moves them one ahead of Milan, but they're still 16 behind Juventus, but that's kind of irrelevant. Milan this year are on to their second manager of the season. So far, it's working really well under Conceição, but they're not really in the title race. Juve, we probably...
It will be. He's a Sven-Göran Eriksson disciple.
Juve have been a bit of a mixed bag this year, to say the least. They haven't been particularly impressive under Motta. Inter's average age of their squad is now 29. Will he see this summer as a good time to walk away? I mean, Sommer and Mkhitaryan are 36, De Vrij is 32, Darmian is 35 somehow out of nowhere. Çalhanoğlu's 30, Zielinski's 30, Acerbi's 36. Like, there's some really old guys in there. I'm not saying it's a disaster of a squad build whatsoever, because there are some really solid contract lengths in there as well. So Çalhanoğlu and DeMarco are down till 2027. Bastoni, Thuram, Pavard, Dumfries till 2028. Lautaro and Barella till 2029. So basically, the core of their side are down for another 2 years. But say Ancelotti does leave Real Madrid this summer, which feels like it is a distinct possibility, particularly if they end the season with no La Liga and no Champions League, which is it's a real possibility. And maybe Florentino Perez, maybe Ancelotti himself say, thank you very much for your time here. We've absolutely loved it on both counts, but we want to try something new. I think most people around Europe and in football circles think it's nailed down for Xabi Alonso to take over. I think Simone Inzaghi would be a really, really interesting appointment in charge of Real Madrid. And maybe stylistically, Florentino Perez would be reluctant. Maybe he doesn't see 3-5-2 as the future of Real Madrid. But I actually think 3-5-2 fixes a lot of issues at Real Madrid, to be totally honest. I think Vinicius Jr. and Mbappe in a front two would be absolutely electric. I think if Trent arrives this summer, he feels a nice fit for that right wing back slot, even though he's not potentially as dynamic as other Inzaghi fullbacks of the past. Bellingham in a midfield three with a wing back either side, and you can add another centre back in there. They've got an array of top centre backs. They probably have to sign another one, but they've got an array of top centre backs when they're all fit. We just haven't seen it this year. I think Simone Inzaghi would personally be right up there with Xabi Alonso, if not slightly ahead, due to the fact that Xabi Alonso is so effectively so new to management. And I don't think he's done a bad job this season by any stretch of the imagination. But that job is not going to go anywhere for Xabi Alonso. Would it be sensible for Florentino Perez this summer to be like, Inzaghi's our man for the next 2-3 years? Yes, it'll be a stylistic change, but I think his CV does put him in the shop window, as it were.
Do you think that Florentino Perez knows who Simone Inzaghi is?
It's a worthy question. I'm not so sure. I think Florentino Perez probably has his contacts and his phone book, and I don't think they'll probably many of his contacts and agents, etc., will be like, you need to appoint Simone Inzaghi. I think he'd probably go for the glamorous appointment, which is clearly Xabi Alonso.
Like, one of those things that you talked about earlier about not getting his flowers was about that sort of lack of glamour in the press, right? And I do wonder if that would be held against him, potentially at a club like Real Madrid. I'm not 100% sure that there would be all that much love for the idea of going to a three at the back system at the Bernabeu. But if they were going to go, I think the point is, if you are a team that are going to go for a three at the back system, if you are a team that are open to that as a possibility, currently, I think the best manager on the planet at doing that is Simone Inzaghi, right? Over what we've seen from the last 5 years, he is the person who has kind of taken that formation in various aspects and in various competitions, obviously both domestically and on a European scale, to a level that has put him in the conversation that we are having right now. So I think there is that element of it, but I do think you need to be careful in terms of what you would do, and changing the entire Real Madrid system I would struggle with that as a concept, and potentially he might not get the time needed to actually fix that.
I'm a bit of a madman. I need to see Antonio Rudiger on the overlapping centre-back role. That'd be a lot of fun.
That would be a lot of fun. That really would. So obviously with you pitching him for the Real Madrid job, by the way, I don't think he's got the star power as a name to actually be the right fit here. I think Madrid managers a very specific set of circumstances, and it's a shame to have to put logic aside at times here, Doogie. But that's part of the drill when you try and dream up these things in Madrid. Putting that aside, clearly you're a massive fan. Like you said at the top that you're very passionate about this and that you're a big believer in him. Pitching him for the Madrid job is proof of the pudding. Yeah, that's you think this guy is unbelievable, and fair enough. As I delved through what he'd done over the last 9 years and sort of researched it a bit more and considered the budgets that he's had to play with, the players he's had taken off him, the squad revolution out of his control, and the way he's been able to keep that consistency going, the fact that he's won the vast majority of cup finals he's ever been involved in, I was surprised coming out the other end at just how much respect I gained for him. And that probably just speaks to the overall point, which is that I'd underrated him in the first place. And I'm a guy that's been watching his teams for 9 years weekly. So that really does spell it out. But let's bring it back to finish with to the original question of, like, is he the most underrated manager at the top level of world football right now? I tried to play devil's advocate here, and I tried to think of other managers who were doing very, very good jobs, but were underrated. And I tell you what, I had to immediately discard someone like Xabi Alonso. There's no way he's underrated. If anything, he's possibly overrated just based on, again, that name value. You can't really say that Unai Emery is underrated anymore. I think that's a bit of a tired idea. There is a chance that Vincent Kompany is flying under the radar a bit here, particularly in England, based on the Burnley failure. But this Bayern Munich team are pretty good. The only candidate I could genuinely come up with here was Ernesto Valverde.
Great shout.
Who I think is brilliant. And yes, he's had his crack at the top level. And you know what? After the fact at Barcelona, I think we started to realise just how good a job he'd done at certain points in keeping the lid on things. But I think he's got great longevity at the top of the game. He's got great calm. He's got great structure and belief in consistent principles. He lacks the trophies. But he is in the world's most restrictive job, which is a team who are not really allowed to sign any other than about 5 players every year because they have to be Basque. I think Valverde is a shout here for this conversation. But between the two, I give it Inzaghi as well.
Yeah, I think it's got to be Inzaghi. I'm just thinking of other options. I've always liked Adi Hütter, but I wouldn't call him the most underrated manager in world football. I still really like Marco Rosa, but he's had a really difficult season. I'm settling on Simone Inzaghi or Régis Lebris at Sunderland.
I was wondering when he was going to come up. Look, I think that sometimes we talk about managers who are doing jobs, at the bottom of the table or keeping a side far above where, they potentially should be in terms of, their spend or all of those things. And I think when you're talking about those kind of managers, you can maybe start to look a bit further afield. I don't like watching Bordalas's teams play, but there's no doubt whatsoever that he's effective in terms of what he does and what he's been able to put together, especially in La Liga. But if you're talking about managers who have won things, who have taken their sides deep in European competitions, who have had a crack at the top level in terms of trophies, I think Inzaghi is probably in the top 5 managers in world football right now. And the fact that maybe the top 3, to be honest. And I think that the fact that is an opinion that might be seen as outlandish probably speaks to the fact that he is criminally underrated by much of the world football community.
So there we have it. The panel agrees, Doogie.
Good to have you on board, guys.
Will the listeners agree as well? Who knows? All of your other opinions have gone down like a lead balloon, so I don't have much.
Fair enough.
No. It's been grand. Well, that was a great case made, and I enjoyed researching it. And I've come to the same conclusion with a hat tip and a respectable shout for Mr. Ernesto Valverde as well, who I have a huge amount of appreciation for and always have done, as Jack will attest to. But lovely stuff. It's been good to be back. I'm glad I was fit enough to do a pod. Woo!
It was a great lesson.
You can't do a full 90 minutes after a couple of weeks out. You've got to ease yourself back in with 45-minute shifts.
Indeed. Right, guys, all that's left for me to do is to say thank you, Doogie.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Jack.
Hey, you stole my line. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, boys. I look forward to writing a book about the Sven-Goran Eriksson school of managers from Lazio.
Hey,
also, if Simone
interesting.
Inzaghi is appointed Real Madrid manager, I will be coming back at you guys hard.
and so you should.
I'll buy you a pint.
Just one.
And I will literally buy Simone Inzaghi some flowers. How's that for a compromise?
Love it.
And thanks to listeners for sticking with us. Appreciate you having me with you for another week. I will see you next week. I don't know what the topic is, so I can't even tease it. We haven't discussed it, but we will be here. Unless I get gastro again, but probably not. See you soon.